Operator Syndrome, episode 54. We're back talking to Steve about getting out of the Navy and, um, leaving the teams and then great adventures that come afterwards. In in your story, though, I guess that adventure is you're in Hawaii. Um, you went to Hawaii to go to school, um, but you ended up doing construction, or you're doing both at the same time. You were working through school. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I, well, and backing up a little bit, I said this in a previous episode, but one of the big reasons why I got out is because I wanted an education. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be informed. I just wanted to learn. I was just hungry for, uh, just exploring this crazy big world and, in an intellectual way more than just traveling around and, you know, chopping up, shooting up. So I moved to Hawaii. I was interested in a girl who was living there, who was also in the Navy at the time,
Nice.
and I was picking up surfing a little bit, so I wanted to surf in one of the greatest places in the world, the North Shore and stuff. Did a little bit of that, nothing crazy. I wasn't that great a surfer. I was just kind of, you know, farting around with it, and I thought, well, I'll go to the University of Hawaii. It's a reputable university, and then see where it goes. So the thing that I didn't reckon for when I got there, I didn't, I had a little bit of savings, but I had to pay the bills, and I was counting on my GI Bill to pay for college. So I got a job working construction. I mentioned that as well. So I'm out there laying block, hanging out with these guys who, most of them were, I mean, a couple of them were hilarious. Just good dudes, hardworking, blue collar, guys. And I had no problem with the vocabulary because I was used to expletives as every other word in the SEAL
Right.
team. So that's construction workers are kind of the same.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, it was a really, of course, as if you've gotten out of the military, the transition is strange. You've been doing one thing for so long, and I felt I was really good at it. I felt proficient, and I gave it my best. And I also had, you know I had a level of prestige that was, not common in the military. I'm in SEAL teams in general. I had just been selected for Dev Group, Green Team, and it was in training department. I was doing things at that age, which when I got out, I guess I was 26, uh, yeah, 26. And it was way above my maturity level, probably at the time, in charge of not only thousands and thousands of dollars worth of gear, but people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, SEAL operators' lives. And I
And
told the story
people
about, yeah,
and people turn to you as an expert. I mean, you you
mhm,
were you were you were a subject matter expert, right?
exactly. Yeah. Sought out by new guys, new SEALs that were just out of buds, and guys who were just in fresh platoons who, come across the team area and say, "Hey, Steve, I want to talk to you about this or this weapon system, or what do you think about this?" So, and then there's the larger Navy and military where you kind of have rock stardom status, walking around with your bling. Same with the Ranger tab and, you know your uniform. People, you turn heads. You literally turn heads on bases, and you hear people whispering and pointing, and it's kind of cool. It feeds your ego a bit, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Mm-hmm.
You get to the point after a while operating where all of that goes away. At first, you just can't wait to pin on that trident, but after a few years, you're just like, all right, I'd rather be in civilian clothes anyway,
Mm-hmm.
rather than a uniform. That's kind of a SEAL tradition. Just give us our civvies and our flip flops and let us go. Let's go have fun. But
Sure.
yeah, so it was hard because here I am with guys that really didn't have much, if any, status as far as socially. Not that I was into a huge amount of social status, but they're construction workers or kids, and some of them are just screw offs like we all are at
Mm-hmm.
times. And so, yeah, there were a lot of days when I'd get up and go to work. It was hard work. I mean, it's construction work is not fun. it's, and I was used to hard work, but it was just like, where is this going? So yeah, it was just a really hard time, psychologically.
How
And
was
it
it?
was,
Go
mhm,
ahead.
it was just expensive as hell. I didn't realize
Mhm.
moving to Hawaii how ridiculously, I mean, kind of, well, every food's really high right now all over the place because of other reasons. But man, I got there and I remember looking at one cup of yogurt and it was like 3.50, $3.50. I'm like, I
Really?
don't know. Yeah, it was, well, everything in Hawaii is imported
Hmm.
other than pineapples. But so it's like really, really high. It's one of the highest places, the price places to live. And I just couldn't believe the prices, and I was thinking, I've made a really bad mistake. That kind of was the hardest part, because when I commit to something, I want to follow through with it.
Right.
And so it's kind of hard. It took me almost a year to realize, when I and looked at the enrollment uh, stuff at University of Hawaii, it was going to be, I was out of state. My home residence was Kentucky, so I
Right.
would have had to not only pay Hawaii, University of Hawaii tuition, but out of state University of Hawaii tuition. And I think my GI Bill, the one I had back then, was not
Hmm.
as good as the one now.
Oh, definitely
Not
not.
nearly as good. It was not, it would nowhere close. And it wouldn't even have paid my tuition for 1 year. The whole thing would have been gone in a year.
Yeah, the man,
So
there's
I'm
so much
living with all
there.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the post 9/11 GI Bill came into existence like halfway through my enlistment. So when I enlisted originally, I had like I signed up for the original Montgomery GI
Montgomery.
Bill, and then we knew that it wasn't going to be it would help, but it wasn't going to cover everything. They had this thing
Yep.
called like, and I've heard other folks talk about the kicker. It's like you would like, I guess for like your first year, you'd put in a little bit extra, and then you got some extra out of the end of it. And of
Yeah.
course, like nobody has paperwork for that. Like they
Yeah.
had us sign up for this. I saw the money leave, but I can't prove that I ever signed up
Yeah.
for it. But it didn't. I was very fortunate that the post 9/11 GI Bill came into existence afterward, and it didn't matter because after that you essentially got paid. You were getting paid to go to school after that, and it covered basically all the tuition. What
Yeah.
so had you had the opportunity? You said you worked for a year there in Hawaii. Had you had the opportunity to enroll yet? Like, were you
Um,
doing school and work at the same time?
I never
Uh,
enrolled because I realized it was gonna burn a hole through the GI Bill way too fast. I needed that money. I was counting on it, and that was the major factor why I left Hawaii, to go back to Kentucky, because in-state tuition was, honestly, the GI Bill covered almost all of, if not all of, my tuition. It didn't cover all my books. Of course, room and board it didn't cover, but it did cover, I think, 100% of my tuition, or very close to
I mean, so
it.
you're out of the Navy. You're working construction. You're not a the reason you got out to go to school in that first year out, you hadn't been able to do yet. I mean, I gotta imagine for you mentally that had to have been that's it's a tough time for everyone, but for you, the one thing you wanted to do when you got out, you weren't able to swing it in that first year.
Yeah.
Was that I mean, was that a bummer?
Yeah, it was a bummer. It was definitely a bummer, because it was a job I didn't like. The thing I wanted to do, I wasn't doing, going to school.
Mm-hmm.
Things weren't really popping with the relationship.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, she had a full career. She was an officer in submarines,
Oh,
and it, it was like she was busy. She had a career, and it was kind of like, what the hell am I doing?
mm-hmm.
And even little things, I didn't really care. I let them go, but it still bugged me. Like I remember, one job site, we were just sitting around talking. I don't know, might have been lunch or something, and we are just small talking. And somebody was like, "Hey, so what do you?" He was asking me what I had done. I was like, "Oh, I was in the Navy." I didn't go into it. I was like, "Yeah, I was in the Navy. Got out, came out here to just hang." And he was like, "What did you do in the Navy?" And I was like, "Here we go." Like, "Well, I was in the SEAL teams." And he's like, "Yeah, right." I'm like, yeah, whatever. I wouldn't believe it either.
As I'm thinking about that, like you're
Yeah.
screwed anyway. You're screwed anyway, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not like you can fake your way through being like like some other rate in the Navy because you don't know anything.
Yeah, I know.
So they'd call you out no matter what happened.
Yeah.
No matter what happens.
Yeah. I felt
Um
like saying, oh, I was in the band, I was in the Navy band.
you're like, oh yeah, I got a trumpet in my truck.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's just stuff like that. I was like, yeah, okay, cool. I didn't really dwell on it, but it's just little things like that here and there. Yeah, I mean, even my boss, the guy who hired me, he owned the construction company. He's like,
Hmm.
"You sure you want to work construction? You just got out, and this is because I had a resume of sorts, and there it was. There's the information on my resume.
Hmm.
Really? You want to do this?" I'm like, I got to get a job. I got to do something to pay the bills. So yeah, it just kind of all of that just added up, and going from being somebody,
Hmm.
somebody to feeling like I'm just a Joe Schmo. Yeah, in
a
the
lot
middle.
of a lot of folks, especially with like a combat, it's every a lot of folks in the military, but especially for those who are like combat arm, like in the army, we say like combat arms, right? So
Yeah,
it wouldn't just be infantry; it'd be like combat engineers, or field
right.
artillery, those type of folks who are more combat oriented. Like, it's just natural that when you get out, one of the things you consider, not to mention they for most of the time have actively recruited, but like emergency services like the fire service or the
Right.
police service. Uh, was any of that on your radar at all? Coming
Yeah,
on out.
I was thinking about something in law enforcement, because I'd always thought it was cool going back to my high school days and my kind of larger than life buddy hero who's a narcotics detective, Greg, and he, we used to have. I used to go on ride-alongs with him when they go on drug busts. I thought it was cool as hell. I wanted to be a cop, but they're like, you got to be 21, dude.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, that's when I went into the SEALs. So, yeah. And in fact, I got contacted when I can't even remember how. Oh, it might have been a job fair or something, but it's been so long. But was uh, recruited by the Secret Service to come, and they had a college program where you did a law enforcement major, and I can't remember I think an economic minor because if I remember correctly, see, the Secret Service is Department of Treasury, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody just thinks, well, they
Or they
guard
were, yeah.
the VIPs and the president and all that. Well, that's just a small fraction of what they do. Most of it is credit card fraud and check fraud and counterfeiting and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
And so, and it's office work. It's really boring. Like when I started to dig in, he was like, I said, can I just be on the presidential detail and do that kind of stuff? And he's like, you're not going to do a career doing that. It's just like the military. You can't just always do one thing and have a
Mm-hmm.
career advance like you want. So he goes, 75% of your job or more will be doing in an office, doing credit card fraud and all that. I'm like, man,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that. It just didn't appeal to me. So anyhow, um, the conversation was underway until I really figured out what was going on, and then I bailed out on that.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, I mean, um, before we leave Hawaii, I mean, did you see, um, like, I mean, again, your plan is not quite working out right then, which happens to
Mhm.
most of us.
Yeah.
I mean, were you seeing any sort of negative effects in your own life? I mean, were you having trouble sleeping? Were you drinking a little bit more than you were used to? Were you bummed out? Just was
Yeah. Yeah.
what were you seeing, if anything?
As I look back now, knowing what I know now about self-help and just being healthy in all ways, not just physically, it
Hmm.
was depression. It was definitely depression. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't like I couldn't get out of bed in the morning, but it was in my head, and I wasn't happy. And I mean, it caused me to doubt everything and doubt myself and doubt my relationship. And I did not drink a drop. That's one good thing. I just didn't drink it was my tradition. In the SEALs, I just never drank a drop. I had a few beers once in a great while, but like not much.
Mhm.
And I didn't drink for years after that. I all through my undergrad, all through grad school, seminary, never touched it. So that fortunately wasn't an issue. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
So, is there any, so you said, talking through or looking through what it was gonna take to register for school, presumably
Mhm.
in that second year
Yeah.
afterward. And what year about is this? Like 94,
93.
93?
93. Yeah.
So, um, you look at that, you're like, "Ah, this isn't gonna work. Guess the
Yeah.
relationship's out." So you do head home to Kentucky? Is that where you go after that?
Yeah, I moved back in with my parents. They, for one, yeah, they were living in northern Kentucky at the time, a place called Fort Thomas. For those of you who know that area, and um, Northern Kentucky University was right there, which I was looking for a state university. I didn't care really which. I wanted a state university, and you know that was right in the backyard, basically, of Fort Thomas. And mom and dad had missed me. We hadn't seen each other, just like any military. I mean, on leave here and there at Christmas sometimes, but they had really missed me. And our relationship it wasn't bad, but it just was non-existent. So I thought, it'd be, and they had a nice house with a fully furnished basement, big basement, and it was just the two of them. And they're like, well, just live with us for a while or for as long as you want, and save on the money of going to school, which was hugely helpful. And I'm very grateful to them for allowing me to live there. And it was kind of nice because I had kind of my own apartment, and I could go out the basement doors, the walkout basement, and I could kind of have my own life. It cramped my style a little bit from time to time,
Sure.
but I went full on into academics. Like really, it's just like, if we had a saying, I don't know if the Rangers have it. We used to always say in the SEAL teams, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. Moderation is for cowards. Um,
I don't remember hearing that, but I could definitely envision someone saying something like that for
yeah,
sure.
it's one of our ha-has. Um, our instructors used to tell us that, in addition to other little snippets of things
Mhm.
they would say to us, like the only easy day was yesterday. That was
Mm.
kind of one of our banners. So I went in all in, and it was funny because I remember I got admitted, and it was fall of 93 is when I started. I had come all the way back. I wasn't a full year in Hawaii. I was about 8 months or something. So I came back, and uh, I remember I was really nervous because, and this is I guess a funny aside, but when I remember the first day I walked on campus, I was nervous, so nervous. I remember back when we carried books in our backpacks, loaded with 1,000 pounds of books, and walk into a math class because I ended up as a history major and a literature minor, believe it or not. I just loved history, and I minored in what's called military history. Well, obviously military history, the medieval period, what really interested me,
Okay.
and so yeah, so I was thinking just walk into class, and I'm I'm gonna fail out. That they're gonna see that I'm a dunce, and I'll get Fs, and this will be the end of this, and it'll be back to laying concrete block. I didn't have any confidence in myself, and I've thought a lot about why that was. And all of my life, it goes back to my childhood, like most things do. Um, I went, it's a lot. Yeah, I don't want to go on too long a story, but I went to a really exclusive private school for kindergarten, first and second. It was a school it wasn't a Montessori school, but it was a really outside the box type of a model. And it was elite. Most of the kids there were really well off. The only reason I could go there, I was a very middle class family, but my mom was a school teacher, my dad was a chemist, and she taught at that school. So her kids could go free. So it was this thing where they didn't have traditional, it was like they had pods. They didn't even have classrooms, and they were open with like beanbag chairs, and you could do whatever you want. It was a do it yourself curriculum. So like I was used to like going, oh, I'm gonna go up to the art pod and do artwork. And that's where I went most often. It's just do art and make things. And other kids just, I'm going to the reading pod to do reading. Well, it was a great model, and they produced a really high caliber student, but you had to hang with that model because you developed over time, and they fed your interests. It was a beautiful way to learn. And the teachers were really cool outside the box. There, a lot of them were hippies and just like these people love me, and they hugged me, and they it was a very nurturing environment. Well, my
Yeah.
dad took a job in Pittsburgh, and we all had to up in the middle of second grade, move to Pittsburgh, and they just stuck me right in public school, which to me was like a prison sentence. I was like,
Mm.
where's the art pod? I got to sit here and sit up straight and not talk in this row of seats in a sterile classroom. And it was just like, I mean, that's the normal experience for most of us. But I just was like, what have I done wrong? What, this is like,
Right.
going into jail. Well, the other thing was, and try to wrap this one up, but my reading had fallen behind because I was doing art all the time. So back then, guess where you're going? The special reading room. So
Sure.
I'm that guy. Oh, you got to go to Mrs. So and so's room, because they weren't as kind hearted back then. It was like, all right, you go to the special room. And it's like, and of course, you think the kids didn't point that out? Like, and I'm a new kid, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you got to go to that room. Ha ha, that's for people who aren't very smart.
Yeah.
And that's all I remember. And so I was talking to my mom about it years later, and I was like, Mama, I thought I was a dunce. I thought I was just a really not very smart kid. And she said, well, what you don't remember is like you caught up and passed grade level in like a month. And I'm like, well, the students didn't point that out to me, you
Yeah.
know, because
Well,
they're
yeah.
mean.
Yeah,
So
they wouldn't,
no,
especially in Pittsburgh.
yeah, and I'm not. I just didn't remember any of that. But I remembered going to the special room and feeling like kids making fun of me and pointing at me. So my whole life, I kind of carried a chip that I'm just not that smart.
Mm.
So that carried through my life, and the other part of it, and for anybody else that may feel this way, I ask too many questions. I was a curious kid, and I still to this day ask a lot of questions if I'm interested in something. If I'm not, I probably don't. But I would always ask questions, and then they would answer a question, and I'd say, "Yeah, but you ask too many questions, and you're in a deep hole real quick." And
That's true.
leave it to kids to ask about three why questions in a row, and you're like, now you're into particle physics. Like, I don't know. It's
Right.
just the sun's hot, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
So, but some teachers are good with that, and they nurture that, and other teachers like, just stop asking questions, we got to move on with the lesson. And it's like, but I was unsatisfied. But what I felt like was, I must just be stupid because nobody else is asking questions. I guess they get it all. And
Mhm.
here I am, still scratching my head because I was really deeply curious. Well, now knowing where I am now, and knowing, looking back, I'm like, oh, all of that was not because I was dumb at all. It was other things. But it's funny how you carry stuff. So anyway, back to NKU. I was thinking, walking on campus, I'm like, well, here we go. It's back to the special room for me.
Yeah. No, that's a great anecdote. I mean that that would seem to explain your feeling there. I
Mhm.
mean, good good that you maintain an interest and that you wanted to take that on to begin with.
Yeah.
If that was something important to you, and then of course you stepped up despite your reservations, you displayed, sort of a, individual courage, right? Because it takes courage to
Mhm.
be afraid to put yourself in a new spot.
Yeah.
And for those who do that, whatever that is, um, you know, I think that's a reflection of your character and where you came from to do that. Um, did you feel like How did you feel? So this is mid 90s. I
Mhm.
mean, nowadays, probably like the World War II generation, they all came back and they all went to school or trade
Yeah.
school or something. For folks in my age group, we all came back and a lot of us tried the GI Bill, the post 9/11 GI Bill. So it's a common story. But for mid 90s,
Yeah.
you know, mid-20s Navy SEAL in the classroom with some undergrads, that's not common at all. That's not a
Mm-mm.
common story. Um, how did you feel? Did you just feel like incredibly did you feel way older than your peers?
I kind of did. Yeah. I kind of did. But and looking back, you're not that much older. You're
You're
20,
not. Yeah, you're not.
24, 25, I guess, by then. And and the youngest are 18, 19, and
Yeah.
that's no big deal. But back then, I guess it was more knowing what I had been through and
Mhm.
having seen stuff that around the world and having responsibilities that, let's face it, you know, good grief, these kids had never seen that level of anything. And not their fault. It's just that
Right.
they're kind of innocence, and
Yeah.
you have
They're 18. They're
yeah. So,
18.
and
Yeah.
that came out a lot in class because I could ask questions and say, "Oh, I was in this country and I saw an angle," and the professors were always like, "Whoa, what?" And a lot of them. And I made friends with a lot of history professors because we had a lot of military historians. In fact, look, is the NKU military history lecture series. I just
I
realized I'm drinking out of this mug. Um,
that's product placement right there. That's okay.
yeah, product pricing. Go NKU. It's a great school. It is. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, they and yeah, so I made friends with a lot of the history professors, and I like them and they like me, and they like that I ask a lot of questions because you get to that level of academics and you're so deep in a field, have a lot of knowledge. I mean, tons of knowledge, and you want to share it. And most kids are just rolling their eyes going, let's get the exam over with and move on to my next credit. And
Mhm.
I was wanting to dig in. I was really interested in, where did you study, and what facets of warfare did you study? And I just got enamored with it. Ended up becoming the president of the Historical Honor Society, an editor of the journal, and published in the journal as an undergrad. And so I really took off. I mean, I did pretty well at academics and didn't look back. So
How quickly do you think you adjusted to the academic setting? How quickly do you think you were like, "Oh, you know what? I get it. I get it. I'm okay. I'm gonna be fine here."
yeah, instantly,
Yeah.
instantly, I made straight A's my first semester, and I think I made one B in all of my degree, um,
Mhm.
at the university. So graduated with honors, and I was just like, bam, I got this. You read, you do the assignments, and I was as committed to that as I was being a SEAL. And so I didn't have any problem. I couldn't understand why people were screwing off and failing tests. I'm like, what are you doing?
I it yeah, I felt like I saw the same thing. I felt like any professor where you could display even the smallest amount of maturity, just maturity. Not even you didn't even have to be smart, but if you just showed that you were taking it
Yeah,
seriously, like the professor saw it, latched onto it, and
yeah,
then you benefited from that. Like,
yeah. And now I'm a professor and I see it in my students. I see, and military students tend to be hardworking students. Because I was just at the VA hospital the other day. I had an appointment with a physician, and he was asking me all because he saw my record. He goes, "You were a SEAL? Oh my gosh!" And he's a young guy, young, really nice doctor, and he was just like asking me all of this. Well, what was SEAL training like? How'd you make it through? And all that. He was really enamored because I don't think there's too many ex SEALs go rolling through the Louisville VA Center. But anyway, I was telling this, and then when I left, I said, I hope you stay with the VA. You're great. I really like you as a doctor, and man, veterans appreciate you very much. And he said, I'm never going anywhere but the VA. He said, screw private practice. I love this place, the way they treat me, the way they pay me. And he goes, working with veterans is kind of an eye opener. It's like they listen, they say, yes, sir. They do what I tell them to do for the most part. And he said, it's a good crowd to work with. So that made me feel good. And I hope he felt good because he's a good doctor. But yeah, it's just military. I think more people ought to maybe consider it. Not maybe everybody, of course, everybody, but
going back to school or
the military, and
oh, the
definitely,
military. Okay.
but as a proving ground for maturity. Like I say, it's not for everybody. It's not a one size fits all, but there are a lot of young guys who I think could really. I'm not saying they all would necessarily need to go a combat track either. There's lots of
Mhm.
jobs in the
Absolutely.
military that
Yeah.
you wouldn't have to worry if you're not cut out of that cloth. Um, Plenty of things you could do and get really good training and get college paid for and get discipline and regiment. It's almost like, I've read psychologically that a lot of societies that what one of the things our societies lacks, and one of the reasons tied to that, not the only reason, it's very complex, tied to male violence and our problem in our society with male violence. I mean, let's face it, 97% of the violence, whether it's domestic or crime, is male. That's the way it is. I think I've figured out why in my own head, which is a complex explanation. But part of it, the psychologists and anthropologists have studied it, that we don't in our society have a rite of passage for boys becoming men. A lot of societies, they go through some pretty rigorous becoming a man. I mean, hunter-gatherer tribes I've read about, they beat the crap out of them. It's kind of like a gang initiation, sort of, which is an
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing. You wonder, well, what are they reaching out for, the gangs, in their initiations?
Mm-hmm.
But the military can be that, I think, for a lot of guys. It can be a system, but a positive one, where, yeah, you get your butt kicked. Like you get it handed to you, but they develop something through that process. And I don't know, it doesn't work for everybody, and that's where it gets complicated, because I see the question would be, well, why do so many veterans have problems right now, and suicide rates so high, and homelessness issues? I think the answer to that is what our operator syndrome is about. Combat really wrecks people. It really wrecks people. And that was our discussion of the book War. Um, those guys are messed up for life. Now, that doesn't mean throw in the towel. It's hopeless, hopefully, but boy, it's hopeless for a lot of people, for some reason, that is called operator syndrome. So, yeah, that's the big one. So that's a big one to think about, where the military can be good, and maybe now's a good time because, I mean, we don't know what's tomorrow, but
Mm-hmm.
we're living in a time of relative peace. Although I just heard on the news some special operators got hurt over in Syria yesterday, day before.
Mm-hmm.
Explosion went off and hurt a dog and four operators. Nobody was killed, but thankfully they got a big bad guy.
Well, I've always advocated for some kind of service, not
Mhm.
even military, like, just anything I think can be helpful, and I think maybe in the same vein, it's as a rite of passage, as a break, I think,
Yeah,
the difference between high school and college, at least from an academic perspective, depending on where you go. Most places you go, I don't
yeah,
know that the rigor increases that much. You're just sort of you're almost like a college now. You're just an emancipated high schooler, is what it seems
yeah,
like, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
from like a big milestone, life changing type thing, I don't know that that's quite there. You're just racking up debt and then going wild, which good for you. It's good to have
yeah,
fun. But,
yeah,
if you postpone that a year and you did something else for something greater, whatever that is, again, doesn't have to be military, could be like emergency services, could be,
yeah.
whatever. There are a million programs. There's an organization called the Service Year Alliance. I think that's
Yeah,
essentially what I don't know much about them, so I'm not necessarily like advocating for
yeah,
them here. But the concept of taking a break, I think, could be
yeah,
helpful.
yeah. The
Um,
Peace Corps too.
P score, all that type of stuff. Although I don't know what all the requirements are there because so many
Yeah,
things it requires you to go to college, so that they want you to do it afterwards. But I think
right.
there's more value in taking a break before,
Yeah,
because if I had gone to school right after high school, it would have been a disaster. I have no clue what would have
yeah,
become of me. Even when I went ended up back in school, I did well. I still
yeah,
didn't like school. I don't
yeah.
like
No,
school now. I mean, I've
I
got a
know.
master's degree, but it's not because I'm not quite like you. I wasn't like that intellectually interested in it. I saw it more from like a professional, it
Yeah,
supported professional goals more so. So,
yeah,
but I at least I could take it seriously.
yeah,
Um, so, as we're closing up here, I'm just interested. So, you're being back in school, taking a liking to it, feeling good about it. I'm assuming you felt buoyed by that mentally, emotionally. Were you feeling like
yeah.
things were coming up? Then you were feeling good.
Feeling really good. It was a great time, with, yeah, academics and being successful at it. Uh, just I felt like I had a purpose again. That I'm going somewhere. I don't necessarily know where, but I'm going somewhere. So yeah, and we got along. We really reconnected with my parents in a great way, and I started a jujitsu school in Cincinnati. I was one of the first in Ohio that knew anything. So nobody knew much at all back in those days, and I would have seminars and had Hickson out for a seminar, and it was I did really well at it. It made a lot. It put a lot of money in my bank account. So I
Nice.
had about 30 students at one point. I would do private lessons, group lessons. So and I got better just training, even though I didn't have somebody above me. Of course, I would go out and train with Hickson again and in LA and go to seminars myself. But and he taught me all these kind of cool training techniques. I'm like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get better? And he goes, well, just keep training, keep teaching the techniques and rolling with guys, and you'll get better. But he taught me these kind of outside the box things like put your right hand under your belt and only fight with your left hand when you spar. And I would get guys tapping out with just fighting them literally with one hand.
Nice.
And he would teach me these different moves about how try this. And he said, start in a really bad position, like let somebody take your back and say go and start fighting your way out of that. So it was really cool, and I got better. Got a lot better. So that was another chapter of being there, and that gave me a lot of that fed me a lot too. I fell in love with jujitsu. If you talk to jujitsu people who are hardcore, Brazilian jiu-jitsu I'm talking about, it becomes like a drug.
Mm,
You get so hooked on it. It's not for everybody. If people have big egos, they don't tend to last because you're going to get killed by a lot of people. So you just better check the ego at the door and just go in there to learn. Um, and so anyhow, yeah, it was like a drug to me, a good one. I mean, it was a healthy kind of drug.
mm-hmm. I mean, well, if you felt like you were doing well at the time, I mean, you sort of check off the list of all the things that usually makes for someone successful in that time, right? It's
Yeah,
like you had a goal and you were making progress towards the goal, right? That buoys you.
yeah,
You were tied into family, right? Had a support network, people that loved and cared about you, and you the same back with them. There's another checkbox. You were staying physical, right? You were exercising, you're doing jujitsu or whatever. That's a big part that a lot of us let slip.
yeah,
And then from an entrepreneurial perspective, right? Or hobbies or entrepreneur, you're keeping your mind engaged, even beyond the academic stuff. So if you were doing well at that time, I would expect I see all those check boxes being checked of things, and not all of us who get out do those. Most of us do very few of those, and we pay for it. So that's good. If this were a scientific study, you would think that, okay, well, there's like the control there. Oh, we're out of time, so we're gonna
yeah.
pick
We're
this
out.
back up, and we'll catch you all on the next one. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.